Hello friends, it's Mike Williams. I received an email from a long-time listener who reminded me of Jimmy Page's address and Q&A at the Oxford Union, which took place on October 23, 2017, and uploaded to Oxford's YouTube channel on November 9th, 2017. And please note the date, as 9/11 pops up once again. The email highlighted three noteworthy comments by Jimmy. The first is where Jimmy Page is telling us he visited the same Oxford debating hall back when he was 16 with beat poet Royston Ellis, and how Ellis was connected into the Beatles, and it was Ellis that suggested the spelling of the name Beatles change from having two E's in the name from the lad's Silver Beatles period to the EA spelling as in Beat Poets. Now it's important to keep in mind the Silver Beatles period was around the 1960 timeframe when the Beatles were in their late teens, which would have the group linked to the Beat movement early on in their lives. The Beat generation was a literary movement started by a group of authors whose work explored and influenced American culture and politics in the post-war era. The bulk of their work was published and popularized throughout the 1950s. Thus, the Beat movement was the forerunner of the 1960s cultural revolution. So as with the Beatles, it's very interesting that Page was connected into these people at such an early age. Let's play the clip.
Well, good evening. I can't begin to really tell you what a thrill this is to be here this evening, because I actually was here before when I was 16 years old. And there was a poet called Royston Ellis who actually was hanging out with the Beatles at some point, and actually, as he was a sort of beat poet, or to some description, he was a beat poet from over here, and he encouraged the Beatles to change their, they were Silver Beatles at one time with two E's, and he said, why don't you make it like the Beat Poets? And, well, basically, he was a poet, and he came here to give a talk, and I was accompanying him on guitar for a couple of his poems. Yeah, so it's very interesting that here I am after all of these years.
In the next clip, Jimmy gives us a hint into his fascination with mysticism, including the Golden Dawn, which was a secret society devoted to the study and practice of the occult, metaphysics, and paranormal activities during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, of which Aleister Crowley was a member. He is then asked about the backmasking in Stairway to Heaven and refers to the Paul is Dead conspiracy, which led people to play tracks backwards, including Zeppelin albums, and joking it's hard enough to write songs forward. But Jimmy never states he did not backmask. Instead, his answer is neither an admission or a denial. Let's take a listen.
Hi. A lot of your songs are quite spiritual, like Stairway to Heaven, which is the best song ever written. And I wondered if you could tell us about your involvement in the Golden Dawn.
Oh, my involvement in the Golden Dawn is in so much as I was very interested actually in Eastern and Western mysticism, and I spent time reading and researching when I was younger. Yeah, I guess that's it. That's there were some very eminent characters in the Golden Dawn, and I found it very interesting to see the history of those that had been in it, and this sort of esoteric movement, and also sort of what went on, the offshoots of it. Of that sort of love of all things mystical and magical, all things bright and beautiful, really.
Do you think that's why people did that thing when they played Stairway to Heaven backwards and said that you were talking about Satan?
Yeah, well, you know, I'm going to go straight back to the Beatles here, because there was a time when somebody wrote a thesis about Paul McCartney being dead. And Paul is dead, and if you played back the records, I'm very serious here, it's crazy, but if you played back the records, there was something which said Paul is dead. And so then they started to play back all manner of records, and of course we were going to be main candidates for it. And somebody said, oh, it says My Sweet Satan in it, and I thought, oh gosh. It's hard enough writing the music one way round, rather than that way.
If there's a bustle in your hedgerow, don't be alarmed there. It's just a sprinkling for the May Queen. Yes, there are two paths you can go by, but in the long run, there's still time to change the road you're on.
Now, in this excerpt from the Q&A, Page tells us why the Beatles used studio drummers on their early music, and notice he says the early sessions, plural, and not a single session or specifically saying Love Me Do or P.S. I Love You, the two songs Andy White played on back in 1962. And he may also be dropping a possible clue regarding the use of session guitarists, which Jimmy is telling us was the practice back in the day.
What happened in those days, because I can give you a really good example of this, because everyone knows the Beatles, and I think most people have heard that there was a session drummer, and not Ringo, on the very early sessions.
And I think most people have heard that there was a session drummer, and not Ringo, on the very early sessions.
Why that was because the producers at the time, and certainly the engineers, would prefer to have the drummers that they knew could just set up their drums and it was instant, as opposed to somebody who was new coming in, they'd never met before, and probably had a very odd way of tuning the drums, and every second counts as money in the studio. So they wouldn't really want to be able to have to spend a lot of time getting a drum sound. So the two weak links would be the drums, and then also the guitarist. So that's why I was brought in on all these various sessions, like the Manish Boys and Davy Jones's Locker.
Another interesting email that came my way is from a person who met Andy White before he passed and has a friend that knew Andy personally. The person who reached out to me had a conversation with his friend about the possibility of multiple session drummers playing on Beatles songs. The friend wrote back and said Andy played on many songs and would not doubt he played on Beatle tracks. He also wrote that Andy played on James Bond movies, which is a link to session guitarist Vic Flick. Andy also drummed for Tom Jones, again another connection to Vic Flick, and was a BBC musician. He stated London musicians would freelance, and if they were available, they would get the gig, and then concluded the correspondence by saying George Martin was very complimentary to Andy.
That first occasion with him was all really Brian's fault, because nobody told me. That, you know, when they walked in, this fella came in, this little chap, and I said, "You're our drummer?" I said, "No, he's not. That's your drummer. We're paying good money for that fella." And, you know, we had the best drummer you get in
Andy White,
yeah,
who will never live it down.
I didn't realise until quite late on how much I hurt him by that, and I didn't mean to.
Well, he's a sensitive soul, Ringo. Yeah. He is a sensitive kind of guy, you know, and I don't think we realised how much that hurt him. Yeah. But he got over it. No, you know, he was not precise, and so I think you were used to working with session drummers who were on the ball. And what happened in the Beatles, you know, when we played live, if Ringo sped up a tiny bit, we all just went with him. So nobody really noticed.
In the video I did on Ronnie Verrill, I discussed session guitarist Vic Flick, who was featured on many early 1960s UK pop records. Vic was in the George Martin Orchestra and best known for playing the guitar riff in the James Bond theme. Vic also played a slightly modified James Bond guitar part for the Beatles' 1965 film Help, as well as playing the guitar on the instrumental version of Ringo's theme in the movie A Hard Day's Night. An astute subscriber left a comment letting me know that Vic also played on Billy's Thrillington album. Thrillington is an album produced by Billy, aka Paul McCartney, under the pseudonym of Percy Thrills Thrillington. The album was released in April of 1977 in the UK and in May of 1977 in the US. It is an instrumental cover version of Billy's 1971 album, Ram. We know Vic is linked to George Martin and 2 Beatles soundtracks, but now we find he has ties to Billy via the Thrillington album. It certainly is a small world. Now, before we head out, the drummer on Thrillington was Clem Cattini, who was an English rock drummer and a member of the Tornadoes before becoming well known for his work as a session musician. He is one of the most prolific drummers in UK recording history, appearing on hundreds of recordings by artists as diverse as Cliff Richard and Lou Reed, and has been featured on 42 different UK #1 singles. Could Clem be another candidate to have drummed on Beatles songs? I'll let you decide. And with that, thanks for listening and have a great day.
Now, an artist who's had more #1 hits than anyone else in Britain. And yet, while you'll have listened to his records, chances are you may never have heard of him. Clem Cattini. He's a drummer from Stoke Newington who's actually played on more than 40 #1 singles, performing with some of the biggest stars of a generation. But on Monday, he's going to get the recognition some say he is long overdue. He's been talking to our entertainment correspondent, Lucrezia Millerini.
Drumming for over 50 years, Clem Cattini's lost count of just how many hits he's performed on. Hundreds possibly, at least 44 of them #1 singles.
I've never counted them, to be honest, because half the time, I've got to be honest, I don't know what I played on. I mean, there's records coming out the cupboards at the moment that I played on that I didn't even know I played on.
It's not unusual.
Well, they include huge hits like It's Not Unusual by Tom Jones, T-Rex's Get It On, and You Really Got Me by The Kinks.
Clem Cattini.
But he did enjoy his very own #1 single with his own band in 1962.
5 names that add up to the Tornadoes.
Now talk to me about your band, the Tornadoes.
All right, yeah.
Because you were the band leader.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah, I was the one that did all the work, let's put it that way.
Did you decide to make this record on your own? Or?
Well, actually, it wasn't us, it was our recording manager.
But you had a #1 single.
Yeah, we had first band I might add this, to ever get #1 in America. And also in England at the same time.
Topping the US charts for the first time ever. It's a British band.
2 million copies.
And the single was Telstar.
Telstar, yeah.
A movie was made.
Yeah, recently, yeah, called Telstar. And James Corden actually played me in the film. God bless him.
That's not bad, is it?
No.
But despite all those hits and the movie, Clem is part of another group, those unsung heroes, the session musicians, without whom many a star would not have been made.
I was known because I was in groups, but a lot of guys that weren't, if they were in bands, they were just faceless wonders, you know. We've got some of the best musicians in the world, and they don't get recognition for it.
For Clem, at least, that recognition will come next Monday. He'll receive a Lifetime Achievement Award at a special memorial concert for drummer Buddy Rich at the London Palladium.
I'm really sort of absolutely honoured with it all, you know.
Yeah.
There again, I feel embarrassed.
No. Don't feel embarrassed. Take your award and be proud. Clem, it's lovely to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Lucrezia Millerini talking to the rather talented Clem Cattini.